Welcome everyone to Hunt the Habitat. A great dog and a shotgun will only get you so far in the uplands. In this podcast, Ann Jandernaw helps us to attain a more in-depth understanding of the birds we love to hunt, their habits, their habitat, and how those change through the year and through the hunting season. Hunt the habitat, find the birds. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our latest edition of Hunt the Habitat with Ann Jandernaw, brought to you by Scout and Hunt Maps. My name is Steve Blazer, and Ann, in between eating cookies, how are you doing there?
Good. I found some nice soft molasses cookies.
And she's not sharing.
No. The dog came over here and tried to beg, and I waved the spoon at him.
Yes, and we're back to training techniques with kitchen utensils again.
Yeah.
We talked about in earlier podcasts, but you may need to start accumulating food because you may need a boat to get out of your house pretty soon. It's wet up there.
It's wet, but we were a lot drier than what I think people realized. And so right now, I'd say we're still fine as far as soil saturation goes, but a little concerned a little bit about the birds. A friend sent me some pictures of eggshells. So he sends me 3 pictures of these eggs, and it's grouse eggs. He says, are these hatched or poached? Bird was on a nest a week ago, fresh turkey poop 1.5 feet from the nest. Okay, these eggs were fine. If a predator had gotten into these eggs, the shell would have been spread all over the place. It's almost like someone took and literally cut a circle around it and popped the top off. And those chicks are born with an egg tooth.
Okay.
They look like someone just cut it around and then pops the top off of them. And each egg, there's only 2 pieces. It was neat. 7 eggs in that nest. So it's pretty cool. But what's been really interesting, I've got a bunch of females. I haven't named them. So there's females on this road, and there's females over on another area. They're doing the crossing guard thing. There's no chicks yet. So they go so far, they stop the vehicle, and it's like, okay, is everything coming? You get ready with your video camera. And she takes 2 steps, and you sneak just a little bit with the vehicle. She takes another step. But what gets me is, if there was chicks, they'll try to lead you away a little bit.
Okay.
And it's shifting a little bit, but not much. And then I was talking with another gentleman. He saw this past Saturday 1 on the nest and 1 with little ones. So it's starting to happen here.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we worry about too much moisture, but in order to have a decent bug hatch, you do need moisture. You need a certain amount of moisture.
No, the bugs are not a problem this year at all. So those bugs were around before these birds got hatched. So I don't think any additional moisture would help at this point. I think we're at the point that we don't want any more moisture. And it looks like next week we're supposed to have 4 or 5 days of 80 degrees, which I hate, 80 degrees.
It's going to be steamy as wet as the woods are.
Yeah, it's a good time to stay inside with air conditioning going.
The upper Midwest, Minnesota, the UP, northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, it's just been like storm system after storm system.
Yeah, it's just switching.
It hasn't been gentle rain. I mean, it's been... just really hard rain with lots of 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch. And then it'll go a day or 2, and then we get another system coming through.
Right. Well, I'm looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor. And the western part of the UP, that would be the Wakefield, Berglund, Ironwood, just probably right along the edge of Ontonagon down to Bruce's Crossing and Ewing. That's in a moderate drought over there. And they got the drought in New Mexico and Texas. And, of course, there's one tiny little spot in Kansas. But the rest out east just has some preliminary areas that are just a little bit dry. But you get west of Minnesota, Iowa, all the way down to Louisiana. And other than southern Florida, there's just a couple of tiny little spots. And overall, we're right where we need to be. It's white. When the map's white, it means it's good.
That's a good sign. Hey, one of the things we wanted to talk about this evening was about habitat. You and I had an offline discussion about how keyed in we tend to get with cuts and cut age.
Right.
And one of the things that you brought up is that the shrub component associated with these cuts is one of the really important things we need to look at. And it's not just about, hey, let's find all the 13-year-old aspen, okay, or whatever range you
all
tend
the
to
8
like.
or the 9 or the 10 or whatever. You have to judge a cut. You just can't go by the year. You can look at a year and you can say, okay, this is a starting point. But it's not just the year alone. It's what makes up the cut. And it's how much of a percentage of the cut is viable for, would it be for raising chicks or is it for late season? Cuts aren't always meant to be used all through the season, some of them. A lot of them are good for early season when the brood is dispersing. Others are for transitional. And other ones are very specific, which are probably the most important ones. The cuts for late season are the most important because that's key to helping the birds get through the winter. It's not so much the cut as what is around that cut. And it's the distance at that point between specific features of and near and within and adjoining the cut. You want to start where the habitat has the density. But when we think of density, looking at habitat, you got to remember, not all birds are going to be raised in a clear cut. Not all of them are going to be near the tack alders. In different parts of the country, there's different areas, but it's a stem density or a light density effect. I think back to when I was guiding.
Okay.
And I can think of different cuts and places I've been. And some cuts were really good for the early season, and then that same cut wouldn't be worth anything in middle to late season. What I saw that made the difference when I was working these cuts is like in the early season, the birds are coming out of the brood range. The brood range has to have a really nice floor because these aren't pheasants. These aren't birds that want weeds. These are like little chicks that have to weave and move around, and they scatter a little bit to the left and the right, and the mother's trying to, by calling them, sort of herd them to where she wants them.
It can't be terribly grassy.
No, and if you have grassy, you have an open canopy because you're getting sunlight in. Where sunlight hits the ground, you will have grass and weeds. But if you have an interlacing canopy, meaning that the foliage comes together, and it means that you walk in to that area and it's definitely darker. You might get a few rays of sunlight coming in, but it's almost like you weave the canopy together.
Mm-hmm.
That canopy then doesn't allow the weeds to really fill in an area. It allows the little chicks to move around. There's bunchberries, strawberries, insects. And it also forms a hothouse effect because the canopy is interlaced. And when you have that warm, humid environment, that's also good for bugs. It's also good for keeping the chicks warmer. And in Gilligan's research, he proved that a tag alder, besides having potential water, the canopies don't interlace the same. In some places it does, but it has more open pockets because part of the tag alder edge, there is a transition from whatever the habitat is to the tag alder that can get really grassy. So you need an even canopy as best as you can find. You need to have a good floor. And that doesn't mean that there's all this shrub component in there where those chicks are. It's a little less shrub and more ability for the hen to move the chicks around and for the chicks to be able to maneuver and navigate that floor. So then as the leaves start going away and you don't have any leaves up in, say, the aspen, it's the shrubs then that have leaves still. And then eventually the frost takes the leaves off the shrubs. So now if you have a shrub component, think of it this way. If you just have on the left-hand side, say, an aspen cut, which is vertical stems, and on the right-hand side, you have an aspen cut, same age, but you have an understory of hazelbrush or some other winterberry or something like that, which is going to give more cover to the birds. The one on the right with the understory of shrub component. And it's that shrub component, when there are no leaves, that also hazelbrush provides for the catkins for the birds, but it also provides a lot of protection for these birds to move around and to feed, but to be sort of in a tangled mess, and the predators have a hard time getting through there. And especially, it's basically impossible for avian predators. And their concealment is better. It's basically, in the latter part of our season before the snow comes, it's brown with brown. So think of it that way. It also provides corridors for them. So shrub component is important during different times of the year. And in winter, it's just extremely important. Because it also, like I just mentioned, it forms a corridor. Many times between pines, corridor, food. Or pines, shrub, say hazelbrush, food, right there. And they're bobbing around in amongst all that hazelbrush. They can run underneath it quick, but they also can bust up out of it if they need to. So when you look at a cut, you can't always go by the age, and you can't always say, I'm going to find this here, I'm going to find that there. Just your soil even will determining factor of the quality of the cut. When you start and you look at a year of a cut, you need to walk in there judging it for quality, not because you're at some year. And you need to walk through that cut and say, okay, stuff on the left-hand side isn't as good as the right-hand side, because the right-hand side is starting to slowly drop down, and there's more moisture, and there's more bunch berries with berries actually on them, or the strawberry plants look very fresh. And where it's a little higher, it looks pretty slim and dried out. You have to even look at the quality of the vegetation and watch for where your birds transition to. Once they get pressure, which way are they going? And they'll typically run to where the denser area is. And those dense areas in the early season are always darker because there's leaf coverage. And in the late season, those dense areas typically have a lot of shrub component in them. And so when you walk an area and you look at an area and say, okay, I'll start here, but let's see which way the dog's going to drift if it picks up scent. And you learn so much about the quality of the cut when you're doing that, because the dog is just going to help reinforce and then eventually find birds for you. And you need to imprint in your mind what that habitat looked like and what time of day and where did the birds try to flush. And if they flushed and went straight ahead and came back down, you found birds that hadn't been pressured. Or if they take that flight, it looks like they're going to fly to the next county, then you're in an area that other people know about because they obviously have been pressured. So, did I answer the question, or did I go off on a tangent?
Well, you pointed out something really important that I think we all kind of knew that, but you boiled something down here that I don't know that we think
I'm now
about.
Cooking?
No. Well, about first about molasses
Scary.
Cookies, but which you are not sharing. But
no, I'm not. Maybe someday I'll give you a molasses cookie.
But you made a really important point about early season before dispersal. Now, that's my words, not yours. You're gonna sharpen that up for me in a minute. But before dispersal, we are less concerned with shrub component and more concerned with the condition of the floor.
Mm-hmm.
As the season progresses, we become more and more concerned about shrub. We're looking at shrub component because that is the bird's cover once the leaves are down.
Well, think about it. You start out the season, basically, what are we finding? Strawberry leaves, clover, stuff
Right.
like that. And there is a time frame that they are eating aspen leaves. What the mother does, she makes a noise to them. They learn to fly up. In the beginning, she makes a noise and they all stand still and just don't do anything because they can't fly yet. But then as they have the ability to fly, then they fly up and she makes a noise and everyone just sort of freezes up there. Well, they're like, oh, we're up here. I guess there's food. And so they start to learn to eat aspen leaves. But as the aspen leaves become frosted multiple times and they dry out, they just don't hold food value anymore. And I would say the more frost you get, pay attention to the areas, like of the trails. What does the food cover look like? Because if it's starting to look like a dried up salad, they're going to switch to buds.
Okay.
It's funny. I know it's sort of a crazy analogy, but I don't like to eat stuff like that, and I don't think the birds do either. Because how many times do you look at the crop, and of course I've told you guys to smell the crop because it needs to smell fermented. If it's fermented, then it's been probably under 2 hours since they ate. So there's that. But animals are no different. They like to have fresh food. And they only eat something sort of marginally with marginal moisture content to it when nothing else available. And then when winter comes, what are they doing? They're eating buds. That's their staple. So you look at the food, look at the quality of the food, and I don't so much hunt by the food, but I hunt more by the cover. Right. And I know that changes on different areas of the country. Where it becomes like farther south, food sources, grapes and other berries and things like that become important. But up here, I'm hunting by the cover. But to break it down even more, I'm hunting by the quality of the cover. And to break it down even more, I'm hunting by where's the best cover within the cut. And then break it down again, besides where's the best cover, is where's the escape area. If your best cover is sort of like on one side and the escape area is over on that side, then they'll slip really quick then from that side into the escape cover, which means then I've got to lead them just a little bit to block. Instead of letting the dog goes on point, I'm going to shift out and around down to put myself between the bird and the cover.
Sure. And
then watch that dog's head to see what it's doing to give me any indication. So it's reading that cover and saying, these birds need this, 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 and this to be comfortable. And they're going to have a route, or they know, and they're going to go to darker density. I remember the first time I was with Chip Lawton. He's a very talented photographer, and unfortunately he passed away. And I've mentioned him before, but he was also a very dear friend. The first time I met him, I was with Robert Bell from down in Asheville, North Carolina, and he brought Chip along, and that's how I met him. And I found out he was a photographer. The first one to know, do you have a light meter? Because I wanted to get under certain bushes and check the light. Thought I had lost my mind. But that's what I was looking for when I was guiding all the time, was a certain amount of light. It's not full sunlight. It's marginal sunlight. Okay. Marginal light hitting the floor. It's not full sunlight. But your edges give you full sunlight. Right. And the birds will fade into those edges and trying to get back in a shadow. It's the young and dumb ones that stand out in the road in the sunlight. Sure. But ever watch the other ones. You see that grouse, and I'm up there, and I'm looking for the shadow of light that's going out into the road. And they're in that shadow part. These birds, even though they come out, the shadows are their friends because it helps conceal them. And the shadows in a cut keep the weeds from coming up and have all the little small plants. And then the thickness and density of a cut with a very thick shrub component becomes darker and easy to blend into. Think about what these birds can blend into, which is pretty cool. They have to use everything for their advantage in order to stay alive. So a lot of times what we need to remember is it's not just the cut. It's having specific qualities within the cut that makes all the difference. And a lot of those qualities, yes, we start out with a year, but we need to walk through that cut, look at that cut and say, okay, I've got density over here, and I've got a nice floor, and then over here, I've got shrub component, and then conifer, and you have a corridor. You have a corridor then that would work throughout any part of the season. But then the early part of the season, those chicks need a better floor.
Okay.
And then as the season progresses, then they're going to be looking for a combination of shrub component, because a shrub component with a cut is darker because it's intertwined and those birds can blend in there. And then when you get toward late season, they're going to want the shadows of the pines on the edge, and then they'll come out into those shrub components, or at dusk is when they start to feed. Typically, very few times do they feed during the best time of the day. Usually if they do, it's when a storm is coming and they're forcing to feed. So,
right. When you talk about shrub component, is there an ideal height?
No, it's density.
Okay.
Well, I'm 5'2", so typically it's anything taller than me.
Well, but you answered the question there. 3 feet high is not enough.
No, because you don't have the density.
Okay.
How much shadow does a 3-foot shrub give you?
Right.
And a 3-foot shrub isn't going to be intertwined enough in the branches.
All right.
So if it's 3 foot, where it gets thick is only like 5 or 6 inches from the ground. But if you got a 6 to 8 foot shrub, then it becomes corridors underneath there. You could lay down on the ground and look down underneath there and see open area.
Right. Nothing's going to get in there from the top. The birds are safe.
Right. But think about the corridors. It's no different than pines. Pines, you don't want the branches way up high. You want them down closer to the ground. And so the birds are underneath there and they can maneuver and they feel safe. I mean, if you ever look underneath some of the pines, you'll see droppings all over the place. It's a safety area.
In an ideal world, I don't know if there's a good answer to this, but in an ideal world, is there a right distance from pines to our mythical 6-foot-high shrub component?
They don't want to be running across a big open area, I can tell you that.
Yeah. We want to be within 100 yards, within 50 yards, or is that...
Yeah, it's closer.
Or is there not an answer? Closer yet?
Yeah, closer. You're forming a corridor.
Okay.
Or something that they can quickly dart from one to the other.
Okay. So in a perfect world, we're looking for a shrub component, 5, 6, 7 foot, 8 foot high shrub component, relatively close to pines.
Let's put it this way. If it gets much farther than the width of a regular road, they don't like that.
Okay.
They do not like it. Have you ever noticed how fast they beeline across the road sometimes? Especially if there's no shade. The head goes down and they go look like they're trying to imitate the road runner. They don't like big open stretches that they have to run. They don't like that at all.
Hawks like that.
Oh, yeah. Predators like that.
Yes. Yeah, you were mentioning earlier how many hawks you're seeing this year, and how, unfortunately, that's also how you're finding some broods.
Yeah, well, I've always watched the hawks because usually where I find the hawks, I know there's usually birds in that area. And they're just watching and waiting. But if it's dense enough, if they can get across the road, and especially if there's banks got foliage on it, plants, those young birds of the year, they go under the plants and they shift. So you think they're in one place and they've shifted 2, 3, 4 feet either side. It's sort of like the same principle of having a snow burrow. You know?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, except they're doing it with plants.
I know this changes by region. Okay. And listeners in one part of the country are this applies differently. Up by you, is there a specific species of hawk that's the biggest problem? Is it goshawks? Is it red shoulders? Is it what's worst?
I look up and I say, "Oh, there's another hawk." I mean, some of them I know what they are, but I just tend to lump everyone together. Okay, bad birds. I just lump predators with predators. Like the other day, I saw a bobcat. I've seen him a couple times, and then there's been a couple times there's been a fisher at the end of the access road. And then there's times that I see a fox, the owls. It's really interesting when you start hearing the owls early, like before it gets dark. Sometimes that's a little unsettling because it's like, right, you're hunting this early and calling to each other. And so it's interesting how sometimes during the seasons, the start of spring and the start of fall transitioning to winter, that you see the owls come and go and the different avian predators. And you can tell in the spring, there's a time period typically that before the drumming really gets going full bore, or it's sort of at the start of it, but it's really starting to ramp up, that it's like those birds have no care in the world. It's like they'd never stand there. And then all of a sudden, one day, the hawks show up, and everyone's now like, "Where's the shadows?" It's like someone got the memo. They're here. I think it depends on areas. Some places have more of one species versus another, but I can tell you there's too many of them to begin with. So,
you talked about a bobcat. I had a cool thing happen deer hunting this year, and had a bobcat come through. And I've deer hunted a lot of years. I've never had that happen. I'm sure we've got listeners that have experienced that, but I had not. And it was cool. I only could watch it for 10 seconds as it kind of slinked through at the bottom of a swamp, on the edge of a swamp. But that was neat.
Yeah, I was up in Canada late season one time with a friend, and the dogs were working. I looked down and I said, "We got lynx tracks." And he says, "Yeah, you got lynx." And I was all enamored with lynx. I mean, I think they're really cool. Tracks are big. There was a pair of them. One had a fresh cut on its pad. And I've probably mentioned this before, but it was one of those times that you look at something and say, that blood's not frozen. I took my glove off and put your finger on that blood, and it just felt so fresh. Like, well, they're not too far ahead, and they're just taking their own time walking down the trail, and there's two big lynxes. I wanted to see them, but not with my dogs there.
Not that close. Yeah. Hey, can I ask you a dog training question?
Sure.
Amongst pointing dog people, there is a lot of discussion about teaching your dog to sit. And I've got friends that feel very passionately both ways. One says it doesn't matter, manners thing in the house, and it doesn't interfere with them woeing later on. Other people have experienced problems where the dog is sitting so ingrained that it causes problems later on. What's your opinion on that?
No, obviously I run the old style setters from Europe, and they'll sit, they'll lay down, they'll slink, they'll cat crawl, and they'll do it all. But with that being said, I think some of the sitting part is sometimes with dogs, it goes back to what the dogs used to originally do. That's what they did. They sat and they slinked and they crawled. But in the U.S., people don't want them to do that. They want them to stand head high, tail high, and that's what they want in a lot of the U.S. line dogs.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a dog that's soft, mentally a little bit, and sitting, for some dogs, not all dogs, but can be a stress point. It's indicating that you're putting too much stress on that dog, and many times you'll see it lick its lips.
Okay.
And then it'll sit down. It's not mentally secure about what's happening. And let's just say it's one of those dogs you can't, how would you say it? You can't, oh! And the dog just cringes. That type of dog?
I have one of those.
Yeah. Well, that's the one that sometimes you go and you get after them too much and they sit down. And you'll see them gulp. They'll swallow. What do people do when they really get nervous? They swallow.
Okay.
There'll be some, like, they'll shift feet, even shift their weight. The eyes will dart around a little bit, and they'll lose their concentration on the bird. And some dogs, they're not sure of themselves. And so, well, do I stand? Do I sit? I just got yelled at. But they're not associating being yelled at for moving.
Mm-hmm.
They just hear the yell. So what happens when someone really yells at you, say, or yells at a young person? What happens to the shoulders? They go down.
Right.
I'm not trying to put human characteristics into the dog, but it can be like Hugo. If I get upset at Hugo and yell at him, he slams his butt on the ground. He's fine on birds, but he's like, oh shit, I'm in trouble again.
Or still.
Yeah, or still. And I guess the thing is, you got to look at your dog.
Okay.
If your dog is a soft dog, work on the tone that you're using with that dog. But if you teach it to sit, it also associates sitting with staying still. So is it getting confused with whoa and sit?
Okay.
It could be. I would say if you have a soft dog, you're starting to see a little bit if you yell or something, a little bit. You put a little pressure on it and it sits down. I wouldn't try to be teaching sit, but that's not what you want. I'd wait to let it get confident and build up its confidence around birds.
Okay.
And wait to teach that. I mean, it's not that you can't teach it. It's just, it's confusing at that point for that dog. Which do I do? Well, if I sit, I'm not moving. Okay? So which is it, sit or whoa?
Okay. Yeah, because so many of us, that's the first one of the first commands, because it's such an easy command to teach. Okay? Push the puppy's butt to the ground, give them a treat. There are dogs that are sitting reliably at 12 weeks. And I will say that I experienced the not so great side of it. Okay, my younger setter, Bella, is really soft. So you just explained something to me. Okay, this makes sense now.
Oh, really? Good.
Yeah, because when I went to teach her whoa, to start working on whoa, every time I tried to stop her movement, she sat.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time. She's okay now, but it took a long time. Whereas Knothead Hazel, who we have talked about numerous times, she's a really strong dog. She's a strong-willed dog. She's really smart. She's very independent and had none of those issues. Mm-hmm. Whoa broke quickly. She'll sit when you tell her to sit. But Bella, the younger setter, she is a very soft.
Mm-hmm.
So this makes a lot of sense.
People that get my pups, I let them take them home, but I pretty much give them a list of don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I want this pup to come back with a clean slate to me. Because if it has a clean slate for what I need to do, I can do it faster. And if I have to undo things, it takes longer. And it's frustrating.
Sure.
And so I don't want them to teach them to sit. And I don't mind if they say, whoa, at the crate. But what happens to a puppy in the crate if you push back a little bit with it, with the hand or that? It has no choice but to sit.
True.
And so that pup would have a lot of confidence on the edge of being maybe almost too bold, but not, because you can channel that. Because I can control everything I want once I have the dog respecting what I want and saying, okay, we're going to have fun, but we're going to do it together. This isn't you running out there and then looking at me. I don't put up with that. And this is you finding a range that the two of us will work together. So I like to start out with a clean slate when these pups come back after 8 weeks. I don't want the puppies walking down the sidewalk because you have an edge there. And what are you doing? You're constantly pulling them off the edge and making them stay in front of you. Well, what am I going to try to do? I want you to go out. And you've just spent 8 weeks of pulling them in? No, this doesn't work well. You have the rest of their lives to do the sidewalk thing. Don't do it when they need that training. I honestly believe you need to really focus the training and concentrate the training. The most difficult things that they're going to learn, but also what is the most pure genetics for them should be done within the first 30 weeks. And you need to not overwhelm them with it, but you have a very strong foundation at that time.
Okay.
So sidewalks, no. Leashes, I'm not crazy about. I realize not everyone has access to the woods. You have one shot of them being clean slate, willing to learn. It's a brand new world. Everything is new to them. And you try not to stumble or make any mistakes with this, because if you can keep it going in the right direction, you'll be farther ahead. By 2 years, you've got a pup that's acting like a 4-year-old. But the foundation's been laid. And it's gelled. And I always tell the guys when they take their pup, I said, you got to remember, this is like cement. It's set up, but you still can put a footprint in it and change the smoothness of it, which would be like changing what they do. It's not that you have to follow everything to the T. If you like what you see, you need to continue what I'm doing. And it's amazing. It's probably one of the most satisfying things that I would say most trainers would say this, is that seeing the light come on, seeing it come together, and watch that pup lift its head, winding, then cast it down and tracking, and then circling back around and keep trying to refine the next scent. It's incredible to watch that come together, and I feel fortunate. I've got 10 puppies to mess around with, and yeah, it's a lot of work, but there's a lot of pride that goes into that. And it's fun to watch. That's one of the things, not only that my lines train up different than U.S. lines, it's more of a hands-off, and I don't say a lot. I just create opportunities, keep it quiet, but I'm able to see every cross I do and know how successful it is. And that's another reason I like to train mine. I want to know what good my breeding's going.
What's working. Well, it is interesting, and this is a rabbit hole that we don't have time to go down, but it is so interesting to listen to some of the older trainers and some of the trainers of older lines like you. I just listened to an interview of Walt Lesser on another podcast, and they're asking him about training and wool breaking and things like that. And Walt basically said, we just got him on birds. There wasn't clicker training. There wasn't this. There wasn't that. When I got my first Llewellyn from Bob Bailey, and Bob just basically said, Steve, that dog will hunt natural. Just put it on birds. And yet there are lots of other philosophies that work very well, and seminars you can go to and things like that. But it's really interesting hearing some of those techniques where it's just, look, give that dog bird exposure.
Well, and even at that, we don't have the number of birds that we used to have.
Very true.
So it doesn't quite work that way as much anymore. Take it that it's sort of like doing the layup. If the dog can do the layup to the point of holding that bird and it knows how to work scent and not panic when the scent gets taken away at a young age, you'll be a lot farther ahead. Because our birds are running more.
Yes.
So if we're training with with pigeons and other birds that don't move. And then we go to the grouse wood, what's happening to that young dog? You have another scenario in there that you haven't trained for. So what you really need to do is train for the worst case scenario, and then everything is easy.
Okay.
Train for the hardest thing that they're going to do. The hardest thing is that they'll have less scent to work. The hardest thing is that scent's going to get taken away from them over and over and over again. And that to them will just become the norm. They don't know any different. So anything that just sits there, it's like, oh, well, it's easy. It's just sitting there. I'm not going to move. They've got confidence in relocating and finding scent over and over and over again. And that's what these birds nowadays do. They run.
They run. Even the woodcock run. I mean,
yeah.
Yes.
You'll get some that stand, but if you train for less scent and you train for scent that's being taken away, the dog doesn't panic. It doesn't speed up. It's calm about it because you want a calmness, because when they speed up, if they're already a little bit warm, now they're too hot. And they start to speed everything up, the whole hunt and everything. And it shouldn't have to be that way. It's like, okay, been there, done this. I know what the game is. And it's hard when you train for a scent that stays in one place. But the real world isn't like that majority of the time.
Right.
So think about what your pup is going to encounter. Maybe you do pheasants, or maybe all you do is quail. And they're not Mearns quail. They covey up and they sort of hold. They don't run. That's easier training. But you have to train for the layup. The shot is left up to the hunter. But if the dog knows how to work the scent and be calm about it, you've got 90% of the battle won.
Outstanding. We covered some interesting stuff today. Really
I don't
did.
know how we went through the time quicker than I thought we would.
We really did it, and shrub component and sit, but my gosh, we covered a lot of stuff. Thank you. Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I just need another cookie.
You need another cookie that you're not sharing.
Well, when you come up to visit, I'll be sure to have cookies.
That's all I can say.
There'll be cookies, but I'll warn you, there's a good bakery here.
No. That's just cheating. You got to make it.
You'll take what you get.
That's just cheating.
No, I am not Susie Homemaker, so forget it. That's your wife. Not me.
Oh, I got Susie Homemaker, but she carries a shotgun too. Give everybody an update. So we talked about my...
Oh, yeah, you're really happy.
2x2. I was actually given the go-ahead to start shouldering my shotgun.
Good.
I'm starting with my hunting gun, which is a fairly light side-by-side 20 gauge. And a good friend of mine and I are going to go out tomorrow, and we're going to go to a skeet field. And I've got some very light loads, and I'm going to pull a trigger. I had a meeting with the surgeon, and he said, just don't be stupid. And he said, you want to try it, see how it feels. This is a huge step in the right direction. I had hoped to be doing this by the end of June, and here we are, week and a half into June, and I'm actually going to get to pull a trigger. So it ought to be fun. I've waited a long time for this. Haven't been able to do what I love to do for quite some time. So all right. Ann, thank you very much. And don't forget, Scout and Hunt Maps, always there for you with or without cell service, always giving you the information you need to be successful. And always remember to hunt the habitat. Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, we'll see you next time.